DEI budget, and then I'm actually going to share with you what you can do without a DEI budget. So these are the 5 things that I came up with based on my experience. Everyone's experience is different. I really like these ones in particular. Number 1, leadership coaching. I've just seen a big shift in DEI practitioners going from diversity trainings to focusing on coaching leadership. Number 2, hired staff to do the work. We can come up with all our programs and policies, but we need to pay the people that do this work. Number 3, policies and practices, and I've come up with some examples here. All of them cost, right? ERG compensation, training and development, inclusive recruiting, partnerships and sponsorships, and paid holidays. Next, number 4, and Jillery, I know you do this, so if we're looking for a resource, perhaps we can reach out to Jillery for further, information on what this looks like. But DEI reporting and auditing definitely costs. And finally, donations and investments. So these are the 5 heavy hitters I consider if you can secure that budget, what I would put it towards, in my opinion, what goes really, really far. And yeah, two quick things I wanted to add. Companies in the US now spend approximately $8 billion on DEI, and 79% of companies say they will raise DEI budget in 2022. That's a really good sign for us. One of those is a pre-read that I shared with you, so hopefully you can share that. But these are great pieces to share with leaders as we talk about the reason behind securing this budget. And another thing I wanted to add is what's missing from here: a focus on mental health, right? We can talk about leadership coaching, we can talk about staff and policies and practices, but if we are not talking about this in the context of mental health, we are not doing a good job. So all of this, and I had an arrow underneath it before, it looked a little awkward, so I took it out, but this should all be done in the context of mental health, accounting for the fact that people need time, they need to be able to take their PTO, they need to be able to, take parental leave, leave of absence, bereavement, all kinds of things. These cost, but it's worth it when we talk about the investment in our employees. So I really wanted to include this slide. I have gone through a number of resources, and I felt I wasn't doing the right job unless I shared with you why it's important to also look at what you can do if you don't get that budget. Number 1, free job boards. There's a ton of job boards that are available to people that focus on underrepresented populations. Number 2, writing inclusive job ads, right? That's very often the language that we use. Number 3, part-time consultants and part-time committees. So we often talk about hiring DEI consultants, but what if we reduce that to a part-time consultant? And this is a great place to look at the 3 areas that are really beneficial through the Harvard Business Review report. So mentoring and sponsorship, diversity task force, diversity managers. Next, employee surveys. This doesn't need to cost. You can use any number of applications, including Google Forms. And finally, self-education. And by self-education, I mean providing people with resources and asking that they read it and visit it. I mean, I think you know where I'm going with all of this. None of this is going to have the impact as the first 5, but it is 5 options that you can tap into if you do go to your leadership for resources and they aren't able to provide it. Okay, so, and in the research I did, it was also saying big budget doesn't necessarily equal impact. One of the things that I've learned as a DEI practitioner is when somebody comes back and says, look, I don't have the budget, you know what I say to them? I say, let me help you find the budget. And then they're like, yeah, sure. And that's my opportunity to say, where is your money going right now? And they'll say, oh, we're putting this much money to this, or we're putting this many resources to this. I said, well, why don't you consider rerouting it? So people are often looking to DEI practitioners to be problem solvers. So once you put on that hat, the possibilities are very often endless. And yeah, another piece, structural and organizational advantages will put you in a much better spot than if you only advocate for a large budget. So that's what the theme has been in all of our work here, which takes me to this table that I've created and I've used. It's a budget template. So at the top, you see here the 2022 DEI budget aspiration. So what does that look like as a percentage of the annual budget? If you work for yourself and you're bringing in, let's say, 25, 30,000, and you want to allocate 5%, then that gives you an idea. Then you break it down into time, money, and access or labor. And then you break it down into these three different areas. You have DEI priority number 1, that should be your highest budget. DEI priority number 2, number 3, and then unexpected costs, and that should total your 100%. So if you want to use this table, feel free. You can just include your percentages, but it tends to be very well received when people see a breakdown of where the money's going. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about in our breakout rooms. It's in your assignments, it's the iron triangle. I don't know if you've heard of this, but when I saw it, it was like a massive aha moment for me. This is an iron triangle. It was introduced in 1969 and refers by Dr. Martin Barnes. It refers to 3 elements of a project. The concept is that you pick 2, right? You can improve on 2, but you cannot improve on 3. That's why in the middle you see this doesn't exist. We see this as DEI practitioners all the time, right? The expectation is that we do good work, it's cheap, and it's fast. Right? When somebody says, I need it now. Oh my goodness. This is, in my opinion, the biggest recipe for burnout. So as DEI practitioners, if we use this framework and we present it back and say, yeah, you know what? I can deliver 2, but I can't deliver 3. So either you have good and you have cheap, but that means that we take a longer time, or you have cheap and fast, but it's not good quality, or it's fast and it's good, but it's going to cost you. Right? And I've been struggling with this a little bit. I didn't know if I wanted to, I don't want to get too much into it in this class, but as an instructor, I'm getting paid about 5 to 8% of what you all got, what you all signed up for this class. So that's an example of which one can I offer, right? I want to offer good. I want to offer at a price that's reasonable, and I want to be able to provide it to everybody, but something's got to give, right? As DEI practitioners, if we compromise too much, that's where the integrity goes. So this framework has helped me personally say, this is what I need to be able to do the best job possible. Okay, so a couple other things, and then we'll go into our breakout rooms really quickly. If you are a high priority if you're an organization that has high priority DEI objectives, you probably have, number 1, a multi-year budget, number 2, a team with sub-teams, number 3, something similar to what Google used to have, and I know some of you here used to work for Google, which is an allocated percentage of your time spent on things that are not your day-to-day job. If you're an organization that has like a mid-priority commitment to DEI, you probably have an annual budget, you probably have a few headcount, maybe some interns, and you have recognition of this work. And if you're an organization that has a low priority of DEI, that often looks like a project budget. Maybe it's just yourself doing it, and the work is done silently, right? Yeah, so, and each of these can be measured through impacts and outputs. Okay, so that takes us to our exercise. Let me just open it. So I told you before, it's the Nippon Foundation. It's part of the Valuable 500, and they invested $5 million in disability business inclusion. And the result of that was that an additional 54 organizations announced their membership to the same collective. And it's just been a tremendously positive practice in how one organization can influence others. And so my ask is for you to break into groups. And again, I want to give the opportunity for you to all decide if you would rather come back to the main room. I'm here. But if you decide to stay in your small breakout rooms, use a round robin style, which means you each take a minute and you either do a pitch asking for, remember, one of those three things: time, money, access. You can ask for all three, but try to make it like a pitch. Or take 1 minute to discuss what resource you would ask for. It does not need to be it does not need to be in relation to the Nippon Foundation. And then just share one challenge that you have with that and try to arrive at one solution. We'll come back, we'll talk about it. I'll walk you through the assignment and through the next module project. So thank you everybody for going through the slides, and here are our breakout rooms. Here we go. Hi, Kristen and Jeffrey.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
That's good. I came back because I feel like so many things are moving so fast for me. And I work for a small nonprofit organization, and we've done a lot of things backwards as it relates to DEI. And I kind of advocated for myself, and actually one other staff person is taking this course as well, for us to get a little bit more education on how to implement DEI practices within our organization. So some of the spaces, like right now where it's going, I'm like, whoa, I'm really just trying to introduce this to the board in a way that is palatable for them. And so it's a little advanced for me in some of these other areas.
Well, thank you for sharing. Why don't I encourage, in the next couple breakout rooms, stay here, and I think you and I can get a chance to work through that. Can I ask, what is the one, in your opinion, what is the one piece or one program and policy practice, maybe even, that your organization can benefit from learning about? So I'm not even talking about the action phase. I'm just talking about learning.
I'm trying to think of, trying to say one, really, just because I feel like there's so many. Really, how to gain buy-in at the leadership level.
Yeah. So the class that I think you could probably pull from the most is probably the first one, because those resources, I don't know, one way I determine which one is really relevant is when I'm like, I wish someone from my organization was here to hear this, because they really need to hear it. And the rest is kind of like, oh no, we're not there yet, right? So another way to think of it is a lot of DEI practitioners consider it 101, 201, 301. And the 101 is like the foundational, what is DEI? Like, hold on a second, what is it? And I think that that's something that you can really use. But I think there's nuggets to each class that will, because what I find is when people are at the leadership level, they have a ton of questions, and it can really shake you when they come back and they say, what about this and what about that? And when you walk away with the rest of these pieces, you'll be so well equipped to give them the answer to probably get like twice as far as you would think they would get if they only had the foundational. So what I would love to do is slow it down a little bit with, seeing how you're finding this a lot, and also maybe revisit those foundational pieces a little bit so we don't lose sight of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I will definitely do that.
Yeah, and I just want to say, in that first class, I found the wheel of power and privilege. It is like a conversation starter. It is really something that people want to talk about. The diversity iceberg, where people say, "Oh, I noticed this, but I don't know about this." They begin to see themselves in it. And then the last piece was that, today I showed the 6 C's of inclusive leadership. Those 3 pieces are, it just speaks to leaders. I don't know why, but
So I will say we've had the first 2, but we haven't had the 6 C's. And the first 2 were presented by a DEI practitioner that they contracted to do this work with us as we were working on anti-racism framework. And that is really where things kind of blew up. And so now we're in this space of some resistant and some are bought in. And I think the 6 C's will be a piece that we have not had access to that would maybe ease some of the conversation.
yeah, it's true. It's, what's great about it? It's transitional skills. So when you frame it, you're saying, "Oh, okay, curiosity is not just good for me in the workplace; it's good for me in life." If you're a parent, you want to raise children that are curious, right? So it really calls people in. And the title is awesome because it's 6 traits of inclusive leaders. So it's not just 6 traits, right? It's like
Right.
why DEI is important, and leaders love it. They love it. They're like, "Oh, I need to work on this." And so then you can introduce a budget, but slow and steady. We don't want to create something so quickly that it crashes and burns because we just tried to do everything at once, right?
Yes, that's what we're picking up from right now. Just like learning from that experience and revisiting and trying to move slower.
Yeah. I hope that helps. Let's keep talking about this, and I would definitely love to offer you more resources and a slower pace too. So I'm here with you. Sarai, how are you? Of course.
Hi. I'm not sure what happened, but I was in a room by myself, so I was like, I'm getting out of here.
Oh, do you
And then I
want
came
to,
to you. But I was listening to what Kristen was saying, and one of the things that I've learned is when you tell a story, and you mentioned that earlier, sharing stories with people, they can relate to things. And it's not so scary when it's just all business talk, but when you can relate to them in a personal level, they get it. Like you just said, the light bulb lights up and they're like, whoa, okay, I need to work on this. And then they're willing to buy in when you could reach their personal, that story that's going to get them. And so I have to disagree with you on something you said earlier in regards to icebreakers, because we use icebreakers, a lot of icebreakers, to reach people with the storytelling. And when we do that, even what you did was like when you have a meeting and you're saying, how do you feel today? Everybody, you can ask them, everybody, your group of people, how do you feel today? And we got all those beautiful words that people were saying. And then what we do is one of us will write all those words. And then at the end, one of us will read, today you are feeling this, and now and someone is feeling this. And when we go down, it does something to everyone everybody's different in this group, but it brings us all together. And so there's these little techniques you can use that will bring people's attention. And then you can use that as your strategy to get them to listen to what you want to talk about.
Thank you so much for sharing. I sometimes I feel like there's this pressure to commoditize DEI. Like, what can we get out of it? How can we extract it? What can we extract out of it and apply and plug and play? And I feel it. Like I feel it in my body when I feel like we're almost in a direction too far this way, and we're not doing enough humanity. Like we really need to focus on the humanity, right? We really need to
Yes.
bring it back. If we're doing that in some strange way, we end up perpetuating the exact systems that we're trying to break down, right? In that essence, DEI just becomes another industry that's causing inequity.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that we have to focus on that, and that's something that we work on in my organization, is focusing on the humanity, to remembering that we are human and our purpose is to create access and to help people. And if we have to remember that, because that's the only way we're going to continue thriving in it. And when we feel that burnout, we're like, wait, why am I doing this? Because you can easily make money doing something else with your skills, you know. But why are you continuing? What is this? What is it so important to you? How you're touching humanity, what you're doing, so that in the future you can make a change for your children and for their children. And so when we start looking at it like that, then there's purpose. And then we can hold on to it and not let it go. And it can become a true mission for us. So I thank you. I just want to say thank you again, because this is so important to me. And everything that we're learning here is really expanding me and making me think and making me want to continue, because it's exhausting. But thank you.
Thank you, Soraya. It is absolutely exhausting. I often wonder if it needs to be exhausting. I think there's exhaustion where that's the work, right? We're talking about people and communities, but when the exhaustion is like exhaustion around burnout and taking out the humanity, that just needs, we need to correct that, right?
Yeah.
That's we can play a role in that. I don't know.
That's why it's important what you said, to take sabbaticals, but to also lean into other people who are in the same industry to give you a refresher. And maybe sometimes you also have to step back and get refreshed and then come back to the work. We're human. We are human, and just like battery needs to be recharged, right? We need to be recharged, and we need to be encouraged by other folks who are in this industry. And not only that, but we can get ideas from other people who are in other industries as well, to just like reinvigorate us.
Absolutely.
But yeah. We can sometimes become like lone rangers, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. There's a great quote that a friend of mine told me, and it's we're feelers that think, not thinkers that feel. So when you approach it like that, we all feel something. Maybe not all of us, but when we try to remove the human from humanity, it's, the work is, then it just becomes another checkbox industry. This is our opportunity to do the work differently. If we're only going to be talking about getting leadership buy-in and how in these frameworks, and I'm really talking to myself here, then where's the space for that natural conversation to happen where we reach those aha moments just from learning from each other organically, right? It's not necessarily through a structured way. So I think when we come back, what I'm going to do is not try to get that feedback not get everybody to share what they learned, but just offer some space for people to either put, perhaps, Sarai, if you're okay with it, use your example, like, how are you feeling, and putting a word in the chat, and reconnecting with our question in the beginning, which is, what did you learn from each other, right? It can't be summarized in a word. It's often a process. And how are you feeling about this whole thing? Because if we don't acknowledge the fatigue and the exhaustion that comes with this, then what are we doing?
Right, and it's okay. You know, sometimes we're like, okay, we got to keep going, we got to keep going, and we have to realize we're human, and it's okay to feel a certain way as long as we move through it and we continue going through it and not stay stuck in it, because then that's not going to help us or anyone else, because we have to, we're leading, right? But it's okay to feel what you're feeling at the moment. Break it down, accept it, you know, chew it up, and then okay, now let me release this and keep moving forward. And so also when we're sharing and teaching our DEI to our groups, we have to also let the people know it's okay to feel what you're feeling right now. You might not want to accept this, but it's okay. But let's talk about this.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. Absolutely.
it makes it less scary for people.
I appreciate you both sharing this with me so much. Thank you for taking the time and
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yes, thank you very much.
So I close the rooms in 30 seconds. Everybody will be back, but seconds, we'll have everybody back. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a productive conversation. I think we're going to do something a little bit different today with a couple people that were in the non-breakout rooms. We had a great conversation, so I thank you both for that, about how it's important to honor feelings in this space too, and that we definitely all feel like we have that toolkit of frameworks and, you know, all kinds of things now that fill your toolkit. But instead of rushing to hear from everyone like we have, I think that was the opportunity that you had in your group. So I just want to give this space. We can start our Q&A early, but before that, like, why don't you drop in, if you're comfortable, one word as to how you're doing today, how you're feeling. Perhaps it could be how you're feeling about DEI work in general, how you're feeling within organizations. And I think maybe when we see that in the chat, then we understand that every range of human emotion is acceptable. It's not about one being good or bad or right or wrong. Let's intentionally break the binary that we sometimes find ourselves in, and just honor that for a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to give us time to write and read the chat. Yeah, Tina will send it. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Hopeful. It's two, we can have multiple truths, right? We can be frustrated and hopeful. We can be optimistic and tired. We can be, you know, some days we can be more hopeful. Some days we can be less hopeful. It can affect us through our body and our minds. I'm sure some of us. Sorry about that. I apologize. I'm sure some of us all feel it in our bodies. Like, I recently had something called TMJ, which is where your jaw gets locked, and they couldn't find find anything wrong with it. And it turns out that the tension here rides up here, and we sometimes can go through hair loss and a number of other things that affect us physically. Some of us may also have chronic illnesses. So I want to just make space for that and say that I want to equip you with what I have, but not at the cost of your health, right? So yes, thank you, Veronica. That's what the doctor recommended. So I am going to walk you through the assignment. I definitely want to say that I want to give you all the credit for this class. And so if there's something that I can do to make that easier, let me know. I don't want you to cripple under the pressure. You showing up and participating in these breakout rooms is, to me, the evidence of you doing this work. So please don't feel like the work is bearing down on you. I think that the elevator team thinks that we need multiple assignments, but I do wonder if we could make a couple more optional so that we can manage what we're feeling in this chat. So leave that with me, and I will talk to them. And in the meantime, I'm going to show you the assignments, and yeah, we can go from there. So this is optional. This is assignment number 8. It's optional, and it's taking that iron triangle, right? So good, fast, cheap, not all of it's possible. And I want you to imagine that you're trying to secure resources for a DEI project, and we're told that it needs to be all 3 of these. So if you can come up with a 1-paragraph pitch on an impactful DEI program, feel free to make it a couple lines. My rubric, it's 3 points. So basically, if you hit on the 2, so you can pick whether you want it to be good or fast or cheap or good. And just an explanation for why you can't do the 3rd one. So that's our assignment. It's optional. It doesn't work towards your grade. If you feel like you need a break, please take it. If you want to keep this, do it in your own time, but you do not need to do this. It's not mandatory. And then our module project at the end of the 4 classes is on zones of regulation. Some of you may be familiar with becoming anti-racism zones, but I would like, it basically starts with growth, and then learning, and then I believe evolving is the last one. I've linked it here, but I'd like you to create like a similar one. And what I'm looking for is 5 behaviors under the fear zone, the learning zone, and the growth zone, and then 1 tool or technique that you want used to hold leaders accountable. And my rubric is going to be 5 points for fear behavior, 5 points for learning behavior, 5 points for growth behavior, 1 tool or technique, and then I will give you 1 for free, and then the other one is just if you think through an intersectional lens and an equity lens. So I'll make it as low lift as possible, no expectation to write anything here, really just creating a similar framework so that if we want to share that with our organizations, we can. And I've shared some resources here. So I think next class will be really beneficial to a lot of people because it's about collaboration and how we co-create, right? This isn't on one of us, this is on all of us, and we are stronger as a community. So I'm going to leave it open to questions now, and I'll take them as people put their hands up. And yeah, Dr. Nate.
Can you go back over when you were talking about an organization and those 3 different priorities? What's included there: high priority, mid priority, and low priority. I know it wasn't on the slide, but you.
Yes. Let me just open that. It's on my. I need lights. So I don't have it on the slides, but I did read it out, so I can definitely share it with you. Would you like me to reread it or share it with you after the class?
If you can reread it, that would be great.
Sure. So organizations that make DEI a high priority have a multi-year budget, right? So it's not just 2020, it's a couple years looking outward. They invest in teams with sub-teams, so not just one group, but multiple groups. And they allocate a percentage of time for work that's not your day-to-day job for DEI. So perhaps 5 to 10% is the estimate for that. Organizations who have mid-priority, they usually allocate an annual budget, a few headcounts, maybe interns, and a recognition of the work. So that may be like an excellence program or something like that. And then organizations who invest in through low priority often give a project budget, if even that. So not a DEI budget, it's a project budget. It's often just one person, and sometimes they're operating on a volunteer capacity, and the work is done silently, so there's no recognition. In fact, you could almost say that like below low priority is no priority, and that's where you're punished for doing DEI work. And sadly, that does happen within organizations where managers sometimes punish employees for doing that work. Sadly, I just wanted to acknowledge that that does sometimes happen. Hillary?
We had a bit of a conversation in our group that has triggered a question like us. So I work in both the human rights space, so the legal space, and the EDI space, and often they are positioned like that, separate. Even in the school board that I work in, there's an EDI office, and then there's the human rights office. But for me, they're very interconnected, and often when we're thinking about how to get funding for this, it's about, do you want to spend money in litigation, or do you want to spend funding in being proactive? So I'm wondering, in your experience, how do you take up opportunities to kind of bridge that gap, that we're not just talking about this is a nice thing to do, but in many cases, at least from a Canadian context, it's the legal thing to do. It's the legal obligation. It's okay if it's AOD or whatnot.
Sorry, I think I accidentally muted you. I meant to unmute myself. So a couple of things I would do is, number one, I would frame DEI as a core competency. So, we want to make sure that we're not just framing it as something that's a nice to have. There's a really great visual out there, and it's like the different parts of an organization. So you have, for example, I'm just giving some examples: HR, PR, legal, administration, and then you have DEI as an offshoot. And then you have another visual that's comparative where DEI is in the circle. And that's the case that we give for a chief diversity officer for those that have that organizational setup. It's the DEI work needs to be right in there. It cannot be an offshoot of a different department. There's some DEI practitioners that have a real problem with DEI and HR. I definitely want to acknowledge that. And I also have great colleagues who are in DEI and in HR, and they're saying, no, they are very closely linked together. So I don't necessarily take a position on that. My position is not that it is belonging, there's a problem with it belonging to a particular group. I just think it needs to be in the circle. So the way I would approach it is to provide a visual and to say, this is where it needs to be, because it's a core leadership competency. That's what I hear a lot of people say in terms of the language that they use. I see in the chat that a couple people are saying, is Easter and Passover? Yes, absolutely. I will talk to the elevator team specifically about the date that we will give to adjust this assignment on those grounds. So please leave that with me, and I'll update it in classroom tonight if I get a response, if not by tomorrow latest. So thanks for asking and bringing that to my attention. Hillary, I hope that helps. Okay, any other questions? I had seen a hand up, but then it might have gone down. Any other questions? Sheila.
Sorry, that was me. I had put my hand up and somehow it went back down. I have a question regarding employee resource groups and how they intersect with unions. I was listening to Michael Barbaro on New York Times, The Daily, and they had two gentlemen on there who were the folks who finally got a vote, and they have a union at Amazon now. But I think there's some other logistics that need to happen before before it does happen for them. And so you talked about having ERGs at Amazon. So what are the differences between what ERGs are advocating for and what do unions do? Like, are you both advocating for the same things? Do you intersect? Do you work with each other? Or are those two separate things? So I just wanted a little bit more understanding on that.
Such a good question. And I love it because at Amazon, so I used to work at Amazon. My sister works at Starbucks, and both of them are in union conversations right now. And it's really interesting how it plays out. At Starbucks, every employee is called a partner. And so people that are forming a union are very much invited to create and join and participate in employee resource groups. However, at Amazon, the employees who were part of fulfillment centers who are now trying to create a union in New York had a different badge, and that they were told that they actually didn't have access to a lot of the stuff that was available on the internet, on the intranet, and so they were banned from joining ERGs, and this was a massive problem within the organization. A lot of people thought the people that the ERG should be protecting are those within these spaces. And so I think it's a complex conversation, and different organizations take a different approach. Also, from the Canadian/American lens, Canada is a lot more comfortable with unions than the US is. I've learned that in my experience that the US is still trying to figure out, how it's mostly preventative. Like they are there in some areas, but there's a hesitation around it that I didn't necessarily feel there was in Canada. I may not have the full picture there. So if others that work closer with unions have a different experience, please do share in the chat. I would like to learn myself a little bit more, because we don't just want to talk about employee resource groups in the context of people that are sitting behind a desk. We want to talk about it in context of people that really need that support and resources, community, and advocacy. So I hope that helps.
Thanks.
Patrice?
Yes, thank you. So my question is really quickly, is just in your professional opinion, when it comes to DE&I commitments, the external ones that you have on your website that you communicate to the workforce, how should you look into refreshing that every 2 years, every 3 years? What do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and sorry, you asked for the DEI,
like your firm's commitment statement.
Oh, firm's commitment. Yeah, I think that it should be updated actually annually. But again, it depends on the organization, and I think when you lay a foundational strategy, you can build on top of that, right? Your foundational strategy often includes like your mission, your values, your organizational challenges and opportunities, and then the strategy is actually the programs and policies, and those are the ones that can shift and change depending on what's happening in the world. Like we've seen in the context of COVID, everything that happened with the murder of George Floyd, we need to be on our feet too, to pivot where necessary. And we also don't want things so entrenched that we can't work with the people that are actually impacted. A case in point, and I'm just going to give an example, but for a long time, the feminist movement was rooted in white feminism, and only now in the fourth wave are we beginning to have a conversation of what that looks and feels like intersectionally. So imagine if we took that approach and we said, okay, now, it's the same with disabilities. Only now are we starting to have conversations in wider circles about neurodiversity, about invisible disabilities, neurodisabilities, neurodiversity, and invisible disabilities. So we want to start with our foundation, create something, revisit it annually, and then build for the long term.
Thank you.
Yes. Chantel, I think you're our last, and then we will close out. Okay, I don't know if.
Sorry, I'm here. I said really quick, I can hold it, I'll stick with it, but I do want to ask, because I do want others in the class to share, and you too, Dia, around the whole notion of DEI sitting in HR, because that's sort of the position that I'm in. I'm the senior person in HR and the DEI person, and I do find it, I don't really like that position. I wish it were separate, and I will have headcount eventually to hire someone. But I just wanted a general, just to hear others' thoughts on why that could be problematic or not. Because I do think they are cousins, if you will. But what the thinking is behind that.
So Chantel, I want to open that up to others, and if anyone has to leave on the dot of 8:45 my time, 9:45 your time. Yes, please do. I will be sharing the deck. Lost off the top of my head, but when DEI is in HR, the budget is slashed like 1/4. So that's something to keep in mind. Like where it sits determines how much budget we get. And it's in an article. It's a statistic that I think if DEI sits in HR, it gets 1/4, or I don't know the exact number, but the budget as it does when it doesn't sit in HR. So whether or not you support it, that is something to definitely take into consideration. And if anybody has an opposing points of view, because I know we have some recruiters and HR people, please do share. And with that, I just want to wish everybody well that has to go, but I'm going to keep this conversation going for an additional 5 minutes so you get a response to your answer. And I'm going to put myself on mute so we can hear from others.
This is Celia. I love the question that you asked. So the previous job that I had, I reported straight to the HR manager, who then reported to the HR director, who then reported to the senior leadership team. So I was like under 3 or 4 layers, and all it did was make my job difficult to do. Too many gatekeepers, too many barriers, too many people that I had to work with in terms of educating them each and every single time. Hierarchy was horrible. And it's what it does is, I don't mind, like, right, and interestingly enough, right now where I am in my current position, I'm actually realigning myself with HR to say, hey, I don't mind if I actually get situated under HR, because the director there is very much on board with recognizing, what the parallels are between the work. And like you said, that we are cousins. We're more than cousins. I mean, if you're talking about the people's culture, or if you're talking about the life cycle of the employee, DEI is an essential component of it. So from recruitment all the way until the exit interview, it's completely, DEI is completely embedded in there. But we don't see that happening, right? So those are some of the things that I would say. Honestly, like in my case, in one, it was horrible, and another one, I'm actually hoping to get under HR, because where I'm currently situated, it's just literally, I'm like flapping in the wind, right? So, yeah.
Thank you.
I also agree with Salaha in terms of thinking about positionality and access to decision makers is important, but also not being placed in a position where you're only dealing with employee complaints. That it can very easily become only about compliance and complaints, as opposed to how do we proactively embed EDI and have it become everybody's responsibility and not just the responsibility of HR. And so I'm in the human rights office at a school board. There's also employee services that interacts with us when a discipline needs to be laid, and there's competencies that are required there to even understand the difference between a conflict and a human rights issue. But I think I would just be weary about it being pushed into the margins or being pushed to become only about employee complaints, which is important, and there needs to be processes around that, but it can't be the only thing, or else you're just going to be fighting fires all the time.
All the time, yes. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody. I posted a quick visual in here. It kind of supports what a lot of people are saying, but I do encourage us to continue this conversation. I think there's so many important resources we can share behind the HR DEI relationship, and it would just be great because HR is a core component in a lot of organizations, and it's also where we often find DEI placed. It doesn't mean it has to be placed there forever, though. So this is an opportunity for us to perhaps proactively challenge that, but we need the right, either research or something. Chat. I didn't get a chance to read everything. On Tuesday, I will be back on my home computer, so I'll have my regular apparatuses there to be able to read properly and respond a little bit better with a healthier internet connection. But I thank you again for, being patient and really encouraging of me taking this time with my family. If I had a better internet connection, I'd love to show you my son's face. He's around here hovering, but he's ready to go for dinner. So we're going to go for a late dinner, but I wish you all well. And we will slow it down a little bit. And just as a promise, I will absolutely follow up with the timeline for the assignments. And this session's assignment is optional. So keep that in mind. Take care, everybody, and we will see you on Tuesday.